Generation X refers to people born between 1965 and 1980. They are often described as independent, skeptical, emotionally reserved, and self-reliant. But these traits didn't appear randomly. They were shaped by a specific psychological environment. To understand Generation X, we don't start with trends or stereotypes. We don't start with labels or comparisons. We start with what they adapted to. Because Generation X wasn't raised to believe everything would work out. They were raised to handle it if it didn't. We can say that it's a generation shaped by transition. Generation X grew up during a quiet but significant transition. Not a dramatic collapse, not a golden era of certainty, but something in between. Family structures were changing. Divorce rates increased. Two-income households became normal. Latchkey childhoods quietly spread. At the same time, trust in institutions slowly declined. Authority no longer felt absolute. Promises felt conditional. Stability felt temporary. This generation didn't grow up with constant crisis, but they also didn't grow up with guarantees. Psychologically, this matters, because when certainty is limited, the mind adapts. Instead of optimism, Generation X learned practical realism. Hope became cautious. Expectations became measured. Preparation mattered more than reassurance. They learned independence early. Many in Generation X learned independence early. They came home to empty houses. They managed themselves after school. They solved small problems on their own, then bigger ones. They weren't always supervised. They weren't always checked on. They weren't constantly reassured. This wasn't framed as neglect. It was framed as responsibility. You're capable. You can handle it. Figure it out. But psychologically, the message underneath was clear. You are responsible for yourself. Over time, that message didn't just guide behavior. It shaped identity. Self-reliance stopped being a skill and became a default state. One of the strongest psychological traits of Generation X is emotional self-reliance. They learned not to rely too heavily on others emotionally, not because they lacked emotions, but because emotional support wasn't always available. Comfort wasn't guaranteed. Validation wasn't automatic. Vulnerability wasn't always met with safety. So emotions became something to manage privately. Pain became something to contain. Stress became something to push through. This created adults who are often steady in crisis, reliable under pressure, composed when things go wrong, but also uncomfortable asking for help, unsure how to express emotional needs, hesitant to lean on others, not weak, just conditioned. Conditioned to survive quietly. Remember, guys, skepticism is not cynicism. Generation X is often described as skeptical or cynical. But psychologically, this isn't pessimism. It's caution. They watched promises fall short. They saw authority figures fail quietly. They learned that systems don't always protect you. So instead of blind trust, they develop measured realism. They don't immediately believe the story. They don't assume the system will work. They don't expect things to be fair just because they should be. They observe first. They question quietly. They trust slowly. This isn't bitterness, it's adaptation. Generation X wasn't raised to constantly define themselves. There was less emphasis on emotional expression, personal branding, public identity. There was no pressure to perform vulnerability, no expectation to narrate inner life publicly. Instead, value was placed on competence, adaptability, self-control. Psychologically, this created people who don't ask for much, don't expect much, rarely complain. They learned that needing less made life easier. But that low-maintenance identity came with a cost. What's the hidden cost? Being low-maintenance became a survival skill. But over time, it often led to emotional distance, quiet exhaustion, difficulty expressing vulnerability. Many Gen X adults feel capable, but emotionally unseen. They don't lack depth. They lack practice being seen. They show care through actions, not words. Consistency, not reassurance. Presence, not performance. To others, this can feel distant. To them, it feels normal. In relationships, Generation X often values loyalty, reliability, respect. They may not lead with emotion, but they show commitment through consistency. They don't always say how they feel. They show it by staying. This can be misunderstood. In a world that values expression, restraint can look like absence. But psychologically, restraint was learned early. When emotions weren't always safe, containment became protection. Why Generation X is often misunderstood. Younger generations sometimes see Generation X as detached or unexpressive. But what's often missed is this. They learn to survive without expecting emotional safety. And when survival becomes normal, emotional expression can feel unnecessary or unsafe. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's containment. They don't speak because they don't feel. They don't speak because they learn not to. They carry strength without performance. Generation X rarely demonstrates resilience. They don't advertise it. They don't build identity around it. They don't turn endurance into a brand. But psychologically, they are often adaptable under pressure, calm in uncertainty, realistic without being hopeless. They learn to live without guarantees. They learn to keep going without applause. The unseen load. Because they don't perform struggle, their exhaustion often goes unnoticed. Because they don't ask loudly, their needs are often missed. Generation X learned to carry weight quietly, and that weight adds up, not dramatically, not explosively, but slowly. What this means today. Today, many Gen X adults feel competent but tired, feel capable but emotionally stretched, feel strong but unsupported. They are often the bridge generation, holding things together, managing responsibilities, not always being seen for it. Their psychology reflects a lifetime of adaptation. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, wasn't shaped by certainty. They were shaped by transition, self-reliance, quiet adaptation. Understanding their psychology isn't about labels. It's about recognizing the conditions that shape them and why so many learned early on to stand on their own. If this resonated with you, you might find value in the videos that follow. You're welcome to subscribe.